Skeleton Crew is here, and it brings something very new and refreshing to Star Wars. But is it failing in one key way? Welcome to Star Wars Uplink. Star Wars on streaming has always been different. It doesn't really follow the normal streaming patterns in terms of limited series or shorter series. It doesn't have the episode lengths. Originally, this was to give more time for the episodes to tell the story that they are looking to tell rather than trying to hit a time frame. But I think at this point we are just getting excuses from the production leads, not necessarily the creatives themselves, but an overarching demand from Disney to make things a bit shorter than I think they should be. And this isn't a new idea. This is something that I've seen other people have on YouTube videos, podcasts, and blogs. But I think Disney needs to move past this idea that every show needs to be 8 episodes, and I think they need to move the minimum to 12 episodes like Andor. But let me know your thoughts in the comments below on this idea and what you think about the links for Star Wars shows and their episodes in general. But today I want to talk about this idea that Star Wars shows and Disney Star Wars shows in particular, even kind of take this to Marvel as well, need to have pilot episodes. And this is from an article from IGN that I think is quite interesting. Typically, previously, if you look at the history of television and you look at the ideas that television shows have had historically, you present a pilot episode that sets up the characters, sets up the ideas for the overall stories, and brings things forward overall in terms of if a studio should do this or not. And it's a good way to set the tone of a series. It's a good way to set up the characters. And I think it would be valuable for Star Wars in the long term to start implementing this idea. I think there's a lot more potential for Star Wars if they gave each of the shows, instead of let's put an idea in this era with this over here, and instead started from let's make a pilot episode and then expand that pilot episode further. I think this overall just sets the time frame that we're in with entertainment, specifically in the streaming age and television even more particularly, where instead of treating TV shows as TV shows, they're now ways to explore and expand your offerings as a streaming service. There used to be a separation typically from the creatives and the people at the studios, and then the actual people that are making the overall decisions for the business. But since the introduction of the streaming age, that is no longer the case. It is now much shorter of a path from the people making the shows to the executives making the decisions for the shows. And I think that is detrimental to the types of stories that we can have when we look at the overarching landscape of streaming. I also think if you look at Skeleton Crew, I am loving Skeleton Crew. It's super enjoyable. It's a nice, refreshing look at Star Wars. It's in a time frame that we're all familiar with. It takes place in the Mandoverse time period. We even have the pirates from the Mandalorian showing up in the first 2 episodes. So it's clearly setting the time frame of this era, but it is no longer so heavily tied to the overall Mandoverse. It's not like a Mandalorian Season 3 or a Book of Boba Fett, to that matter, of blatantly exploring a time period just to build the time period out. This clearly seems like they have an idea that they want to tell and an overarching story. I think the particulars of how Disney handles Star Wars streaming shows is going to be a problem overall. But that's what I want to talk about in this video, is the lack of a pilot show, is the lack of a standard style TV show. Like The Penguin just came out, and it is 8 episodes, the same amount of episodes that Skeleton Crew will end up being. And this is not different for HBO. HBO typically will have these shorter length seasons, but have much more quality, and those individual episodes will be much longer than is typically expected from something like a Disney show or a typical TV show style format. But if we look at The Penguin and we see the 8 hours of content that is going to be there versus what Skeleton Crew is ultimately going to be, which is probably close to maybe 5 to 6 hours total, if you exclude the credits of these episodes, like you're looking at I think 27 minutes and 35, I think, or 38 total minutes per episode. The credits are typically anywhere from 5 to 7 minutes long. So you're subtracting that from the actual story that is being told. And if you look at that, the overall length of a story that Skeleton Crew can have versus something like The Penguin is much smaller. And I think overall, if you look at something like The Acolyte, I think in particular, really struggle with this, where you have Leslie Headland, who's a showrunner. They had a writer's room for this, but I think they failed mostly because the types of shows that Disney Star Wars makes now is 8-episode links with random various time frames for those episodes. Meanwhile, the writer's rooms and the creatives on that project are much more used to the longer style storytelling that is typically found in television. Like, these people know what they're doing, and they can do it quite well, just not in Star Wars, it seems. So there's a lot of this idea coming here when we look at the Skeleton Crew on, is this actually a problem? Maybe not. I don't think we can actually say yes or no if this is a problem for Skeleton Crew at this point, because we haven't seen the full story, and we are going to get a very different story than anything else that we've seen in Star Wars. The big problem, it seems, for Star Wars, especially Skeleton Crew, is the marketing. The marketing for these shows has been so bad. If you look at the types of marketing that Skeleton Crew has in particular, I've been talking to some friends of mine who are casual Star Wars fans. They don't watch everything. They don't really care about everything connecting or bringing stuff from Legends. They're like, I'm going to watch it if it's good, and I see ads online or whatever. And they were not impressed with Skeleton Crew. And I had to heavily convince them to hop on and watch those 2 episodes. Once they did, they loved it. But one buddy of mine specifically said, I do not think I would have watched this based on just the advertisements or the trailers. The only reason I watched this is because you told me it was good. And I think that's not necessarily an outlier when we look at the Skeleton Crew marketing. Like, we've got a freaking Star Wars show with Jude Law in it, and people aren't hyped out of their mind. I think that ultimately comes down to Lucasfilm just not being convinced that this is going to hit, and not really knowing what Star Wars is successful and which Star Wars is going to resonate with people. And I think that's a big failing. I think they're really missing out on some interesting stories because they just don't know what the modern Star Wars audience wants and what they want from the marketing. They're so heavily tied to every show needs to expand the Mandoverse, everything needs to be tied to something else, everything needs to be this, and this. But if you really boil it down, Star Wars fans want something that reminds them of Star Wars but brings something new to the galaxy. Bring this idea, do something unique, explore the galaxy in a way that has not been done before, but feels familiar enough to make people feel comfortable in investing the time. I don't think a lot of people have watched, especially like outside of The Mandalorian, I don't think many people have watched the Star Wars TV shows because they haven't done a good job of convincing people to watch the Star Wars TV shows outside of The Mandalorian. It's really disappointing. I hope this is something that they can fix. I hope this is something that we slowly see them getting better and better at, because I think it's a shame that Skeleton Crew isn't getting the love and support it kind of needs from Lucasfilm, at least in the time frame it is needed. I hope that Skeleton Crew does very well and puts to shame all the people that decided not to give it a good marketing budget. But hopefully it has good word of mouth like something like Andor, and it continues to have this build up that something like Andor had. But let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Check out our podcast, and may the Force be with you.